Bogdan here. Welcome back to the club for another of my original stories. Let's get into it. The Marriott in downtown Chicago is too quiet at 2 a.m. I was awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to unknot my shoulders after a 12-hour acquisition meeting. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a single, sharp vibration. Normally, I'd ignore it, but the notification was from an app I had installed exactly 36 hours prior. Ring. I put the doorbell up on a whim. The neighborhood had seen some package thefts, and I knocked it out on a Saturday afternoon. I hadn't even mentioned it to my wife, Sarah, yet. I figured I'd tell her when I got back on Friday. I picked up the phone. The screen was blinding in the dark room. Motion detected at the front door. I tapped the alert. The live feed buffered for a second, then cleared. It was raining back home in Seattle. The porch light caught the silver streaks of water, and right there, standing on my welcome mat, was my younger brother, Marcus. He wasn't knocking. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was fishing a key out of his leather jacket. My house key. I watched the screen, my thumb hovering over the microphone button. I could have pressed it. I could have shouted. I could have demanded to know what the hell he was doing there. I didn't. Marcus slid the key into the deadbolt. The lock turned. Smooth. Practiced. He pushed the door open, stepped inside, and shut it behind him. The porch was empty again. For exactly 10 seconds, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped animal. Blood rushed to my ears. The raw primal instinct to break something surged up my throat. Betrayal is a physical thing. It hits your nervous system before your brain even processes the data. It feels like swallowing glass. People think betrayal is a singular event. It's not. It's a structure. It requires logistics, habitual lying, and a fundamental lack of respect for the victim. To build that structure under my roof took time. And then, something inside me shifted. The heat vanished. The anger crystallized into something entirely different. Ice. If you've ever negotiated a high-stakes contract or walked into a boardroom knowing the other side is trying to bleed you dry, you know the feeling. Emotion is a liability. Reaction is a weakness. The second you lose your temper, you lose the game. I sat up and swung my legs over the edge of the bed. I didn't call my wife. I didn't call my brother. I didn't throw a tantrum. Instead, I analyzed the data. Fact 1. Marcus had a key. I hadn't given him one. Fact 2. He was entering my house at 2 a.m. while I was 1,700 miles away. Fact 3. Sarah is a light sleeper. The security alarm is usually set by 10 p.m. The fact that the door opened without the keypad screaming meant the alarm was disabled. She was expecting him. This wasn't an impulse. This wasn't a mistake. This was a system, and systems can be dismantled. I opened my laptop. The blue light washed over my face in the dark room. I opened our joint accounts. I checked the balance on our 401ks. I verified the deed status on the house. I started looking at the scaffolding of my life, not as a husband or a brother, but as a forensic auditor. They thought I was sleeping in Chicago. They thought they were safe. They had no idea that a ticking clock had just started in the dark. I flew back to Seattle on Friday afternoon. The Uber dropped me off at the end of my driveway. The house looked exactly the same. The lawn was cut. The porch light was on. It was a picture-perfect piece of the American dream, paid for by my 60-hour work weeks. I unlocked the door and walked into the kitchen. Sarah was at the island chopping vegetables. She turned, smiled, and wiped her hands on a towel. "Hey," she said, walking over to hug me. "How was Chicago?" The hardest part of a counteroffensive isn't the planning, it's the acting. When someone you trust guts you, your nervous system demands a reaction. It wants you to scream. It wants you to flip the table. But if you bleed, they know you're cut. If you confront them now, you get a messy argument, a bunch of gaslighting, and zero leverage. Ego demands immediate confrontation. Discipline demands silence. I kissed her cheek. She smelled like vanilla. My pulse didn't even spike. "Productive," I said. "Glad to be home." The real torture started on Sunday. Marcus came over to watch the football game. This was our routine. He walked in, grabbed a beer from my fridge, and dropped onto my couch. He gave me that familiar, easy grin. "Good to have you back, bro," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. I looked him dead in the eyes. My own flesh and blood. I smiled back and clinked my bottle against his. Good to be back. Sitting there, listening to them casually banter, I realized something fundamental about betrayal. People who betray you don't view you as an equal. They view you as a resource. To them, I wasn't a husband or an older brother. I was an ATM. I was the mortgage payer. I was the fool subsidizing their fantasy. That realization kills the last bit of empathy you have left. It is incredibly liberating. While they watched the fourth quarter, I went into my home office. I didn't try to crack Sarah's phone passcode. That's amateur work and risks exposure. I went straight to the source. I logged into the admin portal of our home Wi-Fi router. I pulled the DHCP client tables and historical connection logs. Routers don't lie. MAC addresses don't have alibis. I filtered the logs for Marcus's phone. According to the data, his device had been auto-connecting to my network every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon for the past 7 months, right in the middle of my workday. Next, I opened our joint checking account. I didn't look for massive, obvious wire transfers. Amateurs look for big numbers. I looked for anomalies. I pulled 6 months of grocery store receipts and compared them to the bank statements. There it was. Cash back. $50 here, $100 there. Over 7 months, it added up to nearly $4,000 of untraceable cash. She was funding their meetups with my paycheck. They thought they were being clever. They were just being sloppy. I walked back into the living room. Marcus was cheering at a touchdown. Sarah was laughing. I sat back down in my armchair, took a sip of my beer, and watched them. The mask was heavy, but for now, it was my greatest weapon. Monday morning arrived. I kissed my wife goodbye, grabbed my briefcase, and told her I had back-to-back meetings. I didn't go to the office. I drove to a nondescript glass building in Bellevue, Suite 400, the office of a private investigator named Vance. Ex-state patrol. Zero sense of humor. Perfect. I handed him a flash drive containing the router logs and the financial anomalies. Then I drove across town to meet my corporate attorney, a guy whose hourly rate could buy a decent used car. An affair is a breach of contract, but in Washington, a community property state, divorce is a business dissolution. If you treat it like a heartbreak, you lose your shirt. If you treat it like a hostile takeover, you survive. I was preparing for war, and war requires an arsenal. I authorized Vance to place a passive GPS tracker on Sarah's SUV, completely legal, since my name was on the title. I also hired a forensic accountant to run a deep dive asset search on my brother Marcus. For 2 weeks, I lived a double life. I ate dinner with Sarah. I talked about remodeling the kitchen. I played golf with Marcus on Sunday. I smiled. I paid the mortgage. I was a ghost haunting my own life. Then Vance called me into his office. He slid a manila folder across the desk. "They aren't just sleeping together," Vance said. "They're incorporating." I opened the file. It was a business registration for a new LLC, a consulting firm. Marcus was listed as the registered agent. Sarah was listed as the primary managing member. But that wasn't the kill shot. The forensic accountant found the financing. Marcus had applied for a $250,000 commercial loan to fund the startup. The collateral for the loan, the equity in my house. Sarah had forged my signature on a power of attorney document to pledge our jointly owned property as a guarantor for her lover's business. My brother's business. This is the deep, ugly truth about betrayal. It rarely stops at physical infidelity. Lust is cheap. Greed is what destroys lives. They were planning to bleed the equity dry, let the business intentionally fail, and leave me holding a $250,000 bag of debt. Sarah would then file for divorce, force the sale of the house to cover the liens, and walk away clean with Marcus. They didn't just want to stab me in the back. They wanted me to pay for the knife. I closed the folder. The ice in my veins felt absolute. I looked at Vance and my attorney. "We don't confront them," I said, my voice dead flat. "We let them sign the loan. We let them commit the felony." My attorney nodded slowly. The trap wasn't just physical anymore. It was federal. You don't interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake. You hand them a heavier shovel. The strategy was simple, but the mechanics had to be flawless. If I confronted Sarah about the forged power of attorney now, she would play the victim. She'd claim it was a misunderstanding, tear up the document, and I'd be left fighting a messy, expensive divorce over community property. I didn't want a divorce settlement. I wanted an annihilation. To execute the trap, the crime had to be completed. Intent to commit fraud is hard to prosecute. Executed wire fraud and bank fraud? That carries a mandatory federal minimum. I took a personal day and walked into the downtown branch of the bank where Marcus was applying for the commercial loan. I didn't go to a teller. My attorney had arranged a meeting with the regional vice president of risk management and a quiet guy from their internal fraud division. I sat at a mahogany table and slid my real identification, the original deed to my house, and the PI's dossier across the polished wood. I explained exactly what my wife and brother were attempting to do. I showed them the forged signature on the digital application. The bank had two options: deny the loan and alert them, or let the rats run the maze. Banks don't like losing money, but they absolutely despise being used as pawns in a felony. The fraud investigator smiled. It was a cold, corporate smile. We drafted an affidavit right there. I formally declared the POA fraudulent. The bank flagged the loan application internally as a controlled sting. They were going to approve the loan. They were going to let Marcus and Sarah walk into a branch, sit down with a loan officer, and sign the final, notarized closing documents. They were going to let them cross the legal point of no return. With the snare set at the bank, I secured my own perimeter. Over the next 4 days, I systematically dismantled my financial footprint. I opened a new single-owner checking account at a completely different credit union. I rerouted my corporate salary direct deposits. I quietly locked down my credit with all 3 bureaus so no new lines could be opened. I pulled my half of the liquid cash from our joint savings, legally permissible, and parked it in an escrow account managed by my attorney. Sarah didn't notice a thing. She was too busy picking out office furniture online for her new consulting firm. On Wednesday night, we sat on the couch watching Netflix. She rested her head on my shoulder. "I love you," she whispered. "I know," I replied. My voice was steady. My heart rate was a resting 60 beats per minute. I wasn't looking at my wife anymore. I was looking at a ghost. She was a woman who had already signed her own death warrant. She just hadn't heard the drop of the guillotine yet. Closing day for the loan was Friday at 10 a.m. Checkmate was 48 hours away. Friday morning, 9:55 a.m. I was sitting in my attorney's conference room drinking black coffee and watching the second hand sweep across the wall clock. I didn't go to the bank. I didn't need the cinematic satisfaction of kicking open the door and screaming, "I caught you." That's movie garbage. True power is invisible until it crushes you. At 10:14 a.m., my phone buzzed on the glass table. It was a single text message from the bank's internal fraud investigator. Document signed, notarized, execution complete. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The trap had officially snapped. By signing those closing documents with a forged power of attorney, Sarah and Marcus didn't just lie to me. They committed wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. The bank didn't just deny the loan, they immediately locked down the room and called the authorities. Federal statutes don't care about your love affair. They care about liability. An hour later, I authorized my attorney to file the divorce petition. Because Washington is a community property state, the timing was everything. Any debt she incurred after the date of separation, which I legally documented the moment I rerouted my funds and locked my credit, was entirely hers. The fraudulent $250,000 liability she tried to chain to my house was permanently attached to her and Marcus. By the time she made her one phone call from holding, her access to my money was gone. Her name was off the liquid accounts. The house was protected under the fraud affidavit. I never answered her call, nor Marcus's. I packed her remaining clothes in black garbage bags, left them on the porch, and changed every lock on the house. I installed 3 more Ring cameras. They thought I was just a blind working stiff who would roll over and fund their fantasy. Instead, they walked out of that bank in handcuffs, facing federal indictments, crippling legal fees, and total financial ruin. They built a company on a lie, and I let them bury themselves in the foundation. I didn't break their hearts. I broke their futures. Betrayal is a heavy debt that eventually comes due, and the interest rate is always catastrophic. True power isn't found in a screaming match or a shattered plate. It is found in the quiet, methodical execution of boundaries and the law. Protect your assets, guard your peace, and never let emotion dictate your strategy when the people you trust become the enemy. Until next time, stay sharp, and thank you for visiting the club.